Everyone, thanks for joining the Commercial Performance Path Training for the 2022 Denver Energy Code. I'm Courtney Anderson with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, and this is our third training in the commercial series. We developed it with our partners in community planning and development. I know people are still rolling in. I'm actually impressed how many people joined before noon, so thank you. And so I'm going to hand it off to Linda Morrison in CP to get us started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation, which is about the commercial performance path. It's 2 hours in duration. Let's move slides to the Q&A. I'm Linda Morrison. I lead the energy review team for community planning and development, and I'm delighted to share with you the new paths that we have for compliance options. After our prepared material, we'll have a question and answer session, so you can type questions anytime using that Zoom Q&A feature. And during this session, the moderator will say the questions out loud so community planning and development panel can respond. If we're unable to answer your question in our time together today, we'll answer it via email. So this presentation will be recorded and posted to our website. And please join us for other training sessions in the series. Our first one in the series covered electrification in great detail, and we'll be posting that. And that might be a handy reference in conjunction with this one about the performance path. Please help us get the word out by sharing what you've learned and links with your colleagues and interested people. Continuing education credit is available for people who attend the full session. If you called in by phone versus using your laptop and want to get credit, please email Tom Gleason, tom.gleason at denvergov.org so he gets your full information. This timeline helps recap Denver's plans and goals for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. The 2022 Denver Energy Code became effective on May 1st of this year, and it's a step in a series of steps that takes us to the ultimate goal of zero greenhouse gas emissions. Energy efficiency is fundamental, but it alone does not achieve the goal. It takes a combination of efficiency, electrification, and a greener grid. This means we all have a part to play in making these changes, and also we have time to accomplish them incrementally. As building owners, designers, and contractors, we want today's presentation and subsequent conversations to help prepare you for what's ahead, specifically to point out additional requirements for electrification for space and water heating that occur in 2025 and 2027 and are shown in the third row. The Energy Code includes input from a wide variety of community members and stakeholders, and a big thank you to all who contributed. You will find the 2022 Denver Energy Code at denvergov.org/building code. A package of proposed changes to the code is posted there. It's now anticipated to get City Council approval on June 20th. These updates are primarily housekeeping in nature, and the presentation has a preview. Do check back for the latest adopted code and updates to the resources. They will be updated when the code is approved. Denver-specific ComCheck and ResCheck are anticipated to be available in fall of 2023. You will find more resources at the Net Zero Energy Hub, which is at denvergov.org/energy code. This is where the recording of today's presentations and the other presentations will be, as well as resources for specific provisions, compliance options, and other training. More resources are being added, so be sure to check back. And we've also got a pilot to offer you, which is through Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, which helps new building electrification through an incentive for either buildings or homes to incentivize the cost difference between all electric building and a typical mixed fuel building. In exchange for the funding, the pilots agree to share case studies, interviews, and post some construction drawings and lessons learned, so other buildings can look to these as an example. At least 50% of our pilots will be open to equity priority buildings, and the applications are still open. Would love to have you sign up. Tip for referencing the code. You'll hear us use a single reference to a code section in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. This is because the 2022 Denver Building and Fire Code adopts the base code as a reference. So it's a good practice to check Denver's code first to see if there are deletions or modifications to a section, and then reference the base code. Now let's move into today's presentation. Tom Gleason with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency is our moderator, and Elizabeth Gilmore with Energetics is our presenter.
All righty. Hey, everyone, I'm Elizabeth. I'm a president of Energetics Consulting Engineers, and I am delighted to be presenting this topic to you today. We have a lot to cover, so I want to start with our agenda. We'll begin with an overview of the 2022 Denver Energy Code requirements. Then we'll share an overview of the performance path options, as well as the mandatory requirements that will apply. Next will be a quick look at commissioning and air leakage testing requirements. Then it's going to get really interesting as we delve into energy modeling details, how the performance path can apply to existing buildings, and some important specifics on energy modeling protocol. After that, we're going to share some case studies of a few different building types, and then do a demonstration of the energy model reporting and submittal process. Finally, we'll conclude with that question and answer session. So as Linda mentioned, please do use that Q&A feature to enter your questions at any time during the presentation. Let's start with an overview of the requirements that will apply to all pathways. So if you joined us for the prescriptive path training, some of this will look familiar, so bear with me there. Let's take a moment to review how Denver defines commercial buildings in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. The residential provisions of the 2022 Denver Energy Code apply to residential buildings that meet the definition from the code. Residential buildings are detached 1- and 2-family dwellings and multiple single-family dwellings like townhouses, and group R3 and R4 buildings that are 3 stories or less in height above grade plane. Then the commercial provisions of the code apply to new buildings with conditioned space that are not defined as residential buildings, and any such buildings undergoing an addition, remodel, alteration, repair, change of occupancy that would result in an increase in demand for either fossil fuel or electric energy, or change of use. Whew. Also new in the 2022 Denver Energy Code is the definition of an all-electric property. This is used in several places to facilitate easier compliance for all-electric properties. An all-electric property is one that contains no permanently installed equipment or appliances that use combustion, plumbing for fuel gas or fuel oil, or fuel gas utility connection installed within the buildings or site, except for emergency power systems and standby power systems. Emergency power and standby power systems are defined in the code, and service loads where interruption of the primary power could result in loss of human life, serious injuries, or could create hazards or hamper rescue or firefighting operations. So a couple of examples. Would a project that includes an outdoor gas fireplace meet the definition of an all-electric property? No, if the gas fireplace is permanently installed, it does not meet the definition. What about a portable propane grill? Now, if that grill is not permanently installed, it would not disqualify the project from being considered all electric. Let's review the process that is required for any commercial project. All projects will need to choose a compliance pathway and then comply with those requirements. So teams will need to review the requirements of the Denver Green Buildings Ordinance, the Denver Green Code, commissioning and envelope verification, and air leakage testing. All projects will also need to use the checklist for their appropriate pathway to document the requirements, which will vary. The checklist is also where teams will report their 2030 EU-wide target for the Energized Denver Ordinance. Now, there are pros and cons to both compliance pathways. The prescriptive pathway can be pretty nice because it's straightforward and fast, and it's very easy to see what you need to do for compliance. You don't need an energy modeler. You just follow the prescriptive requirements in the Denver Energy Code. You select your C406 efficiency credits, you submit your comm checks, and you are done. However, the performance path offers much more flexibility. And not that I'm biased, I think the holistic design process can really help teams evaluate the cost effectiveness of various different efficiency measures. Energy modeling can also help ensure that the project is on track to meet the Energized Denver Ordinance 2030 EUI targets. Energy models can be used for other things like green certification compliance, utility incentives, and federal tax deduction calculations. The mandatory requirements of the performance path include some parts of ASHRAE 90.1 2019. So selecting your compliance path early will be very important because the farther along the design gets, the harder it gets to change course. For teams that decide to pursue the performance path, performance compliance now has 3 different options for compliance. Compliance by energy cost under C407, compliance by site energy savings, which is Appendix SE, or designing to a fixed energy performance target under Appendix PT. I'd also like to take a moment to share that the link here, denvergov.org/energy code, has tons of great resources that we've referenced in this presentation. So do please make sure to check it out and bookmark it for future reference because Denver is adding new resources all the time. A quick note for our reviewers: to identify the selected compliance path for the Denver inspection team in our current process, the reviewer will enter this information here. Then the inspector has easy access to the permit, but not necessarily the drawings. The reviewer will enter the compliance path in the scope of work box on the permit as one of the 4 options listed, as well as whether the property is all electric. In the future, e-permits will be updated with a field for the design team to enter this as well. Next, let's review a few requirements that would apply to all pathways, starting with the Energize Denver ordinance. Energize Denver is Denver's building performance standard for existing buildings. Buildings that are 25,000 square feet and larger have 2030 EUI targets, energy use intensity targets, and we must report that 2030 EUI target in the permit submittal to raise awareness. Now, while these EUIs are not part of the compliance metrics, it is recommended that they are considered as a part of the design process to ensure success with Energize Denver in the future. Now, if you refer to the PDF of this presentation, which will be posted on Denver's website, this link here will take you to the Energize Denver webpage. Denver has streamlined the checklist policy to make this easier for teams also. There are 5 tabs on the checklist: a general tab, envelope, HVAC and kitchen, service water heating, and power and lighting. Teams can now just print out the tab to PDF for their respective disciplines and put it right onto the drawing sheets in their set. The drawing sheets will already have stamp and signature by discipline, so you don't need any other signatures anymore. The checklist can be found via this link here, or by going to denvergov.org/building code and then clicking checklists. And we'll show you where to find that in the demo here in a few minutes. Another item that's required to be documented by all commercial projects is compliance with the Denver Green Buildings Ordinance. Requirements for this will vary by project type and size. Teams can select from a broad menu of strategies that help Denver to achieve more sustainable development. New to GBO rules and regulations in 2023 is that energy conservation options for new construction, which require an extra 12% or 5% savings beyond code, also require that the project be an all-electric property. So these options are typically done in conjunction with energy modeling for a performance path. Last item is the Denver Green Code. All commercial new construction and major renovation projects are required to have limited mandatory use of the Denver Green Code, regardless of which energy compliance pathway you choose. And this is outlined in Denver Building Code section admin 101.4 if you want to check that out. Major renovation is actually a defined term, and it's important to know what that means. It's an alteration that is a level 3 alteration as per the Denver existing building code, or additions that are either 100,000 square feet or greater than 50% of the existing project gross floor area. Projects will choose a certain number of credits from each category as shown in this table. And it's designed so that teams can choose options that are cost effective and will fit well with their project's other goals. Okay, next let's start to get into more details on the performance pathways. Big picture, performance compliance utilizes whole building energy modeling. All performance pathways have the same documentation requirements. So to begin the process, teams should engage an individual with the ASHRAE Building Energy Modeling Professional Certification, or BEMP. The energy modeler will use Denver's energy modeling report template for compliance documentation. They will also report the EUI, or Energy Use Index, and kBTU per square foot per year to help teams plan for future compliance with your project's Energize Denver Ordinance 2030 target EUI. And as I just mentioned, although meeting that target EUI is not an explicit requirement of energy code compliance, it is important to design new buildings with this future target in mind. The performance pathways have slightly different mandatory requirements than the prescriptive path, and they include requirements from ASHRAE 90.1, 2019. Teams are strongly encouraged, to start using Denver's new performance path checklist early in the design process. It is a really helpful resource that can be used to ensure that all mandatory requirements are implemented in the design. On-site renewable energy can be used to help meet any of the performance paths, but can only offset up to 10% of the proposed design's energy cost or energy use. And we'll have some examples on that later. Finally, all performance paths can also be used for additions and alteration projects. Teams will not have to modify any unaltered portions of existing buildings and will have slightly lower targets than new construction projects. And that can make the performance path a really great option for existing buildings or combination projects that have an existing building element. Once teams begin the energy modeling process, they can evaluate which performance pathway is the best fit for the project. Denver has amended Section C407 from the IECC and has also added 2 more performance pathways. Projects have the option to comply via energy cost savings via Section C407, site energy savings using Appendix SE, or designing to that fixed energy performance target using Appendix PT. Since C407 and Appendix SE use the exact same reference baseline, it will be easy for your energy modeler to evaluate all 3 methods without any extra energy modeling effort. The benefit of using one of the performance paths is that we do encourage that holistic design process. And most importantly, you get more flexibility with prescriptive elements of the energy code. Then you can evaluate relative to Denver's net zero energy goals and plan for your future compliance with Energize Denver. Next, let's review the mandatory requirements that are specific to the performance pathways. Mandatory requirements in C407.2 of the 2022 Denver Energy Code are required regardless whether the project is complying prescriptively or via a performance path. But then projects using the performance path must follow mandatory provisions of ASHRAE 90.1 2019, as well as those of the Denver Energy Code. A common question that we've been hearing is, why do we need to use ASHRAE 90.1 mandatory requirements if we aren't using an ASHRAE path to demonstrate compliance? That's a great question. The reason for this is that the Denver Energy Code performance pathways use ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G modeling protocol. And in order to make that compliance valid, we do have to follow those requirements. So since those are new to a lot of teams, make sure to start your checklist for your performance projects early so that you can get ahead of that. Fortunately, the ASHRAE requirements are very similar to standard IECC. So in this presentation, we're going to identify those differences for you. And then you can take that to go find more details about each section. All right, the next few slides are going to identify those differences in the mandatory requirements between prescriptive and performance path specific to the ASHRAE 90.1 requirements. Now, this is not a comprehensive list of the differences, but it'll give you the highlights. And then I strongly encourage you to use that performance checklist to help identify the differences. Envelope is easy. There really is very little difference. We will use ASHRAE Appendix G for our energy model baselines, and we add the option for a semi-heated space category, which we'll review a little bit later in this presentation. But otherwise, Envelope follows the standard Denver Energy Code. One thing that is the same no matter which pathway you choose, but is an important one to bring your attention to because this is a new thing for performance path projects. Minimum insulation requirements are now in place for certain above grade opaque envelope components. This is a mandatory requirement, and must be met for all new construction projects, regardless of the compliance path chosen. This limits the trade-offs available when using either the component performance alternative, if you were to use ComCheck, as well as what we can do under the performance pathway. For example, the maximum U factor here in this table for wood frame construction is a U value of 0.064. So this is equivalent to a 2x4 framed assembly with our 3.8 continuous insulation, or a 2x6 framed assembly with only our 20 cavity insulation. So this new change is designed to promote efficient building assemblies, which often stay unchanged for the life of the building. The minimum insulation requirements are regulated by component U factor, and you'll note that the mandatory minimum U factors are not as stringent as the prescriptive U factors that are listed in the code. There are some exceptions here to make sure that you are aware of, and if you want to use any of those, you just do need to make sure that you document that in your permit submittal. Another mandatory that is in the same as both pathways, Section C103.2 requires that the location of the air barrier, ceiling details, and the building thermal envelope are represented on the drawings. So this multifamily project does a really nice depiction of the thermal envelope and the air barrier in plan and in section. And then they also show the unit compartmentalization requirements. You see that they've got the air barrier and thermal envelope described in the keynotes there. And this is a great way to document the location of the air barriers and thermal envelope, and can serve as a guide to ensure the air sealing is continuous. Let's look at HVAC and kitchen next. Many of the ASHRAE requirements are identical to the IECC. HVAC control requirements for some systems and parking garage ventilation controls have some slight differences, so teams will want to review those sections, as well as the Denver Mechanical Code more specifically. But you'll find that a lot of things still align. Duct testing is also just slightly different. Testing is required for ducts operating at 3 inches of static or greater for both IECC and ASHRAE. But ASHRAE also adds testing for all outdoor ductwork. And these instructions must be noted in drawings to flag for the contractor. Building electrification, of course, is a hot topic, so please note that there is a separate presentation that gets into that in much more detail. And that's going to be posted as well to denvergov.org/energycode. There we go. Let's quickly mention ventilation requirements. These are also the same no matter which pathway you choose, but there's some specific modeling requirements to consider and a few new things to point out, especially as they apply to energy modeling. For the designers, when designing ventilation for multifamily residential projects, make sure you follow the Denver Mechanical Code, not ASHRAE 62.2. Then for all other commercial spaces, the ventilation procedure in Chapter 4 of the Denver Mechanical Code should be used since it's our adopted code. However, the ventilation procedure in Section 403 of the Denver Mechanical Code is almost identical to the ventilation procedure in 6.2 of ASHRAE 62.1. So Denver will accept either Denver Mechanical Code 403 or the ventilation rate procedure in 6.2 of ASHRAE 62.1 to demonstrate code compliance for ventilation. Now, if you would like to use the indoor air quality procedure in 6.3 of ASHRAE 62.1, that can work too, but you will require an administrative modification to use it. Now we've got some specific rules for energy modeling as it applies to ventilation. Multifamily ventilation should be modeled as fans running continuously, even if it is designed to operate intermittently under the Denver Mechanical Code, which would be permitted. Everything else should be modeled just as designed. And it's important to note those references in ASHRAE 62.1 in Appendix G for zone air distribution effectiveness can apply whether the project is designed to the Denver Mechanical Code or ASHRAE 62.1. All right, back to our mandatories. Service water heating is next. Very little differences here. There are slight differences in pool control and cover requirements, namely that 90.1 requires covers for both indoor and outdoor pools, whereas the prescriptive path only requires them on outdoor pools. The service water pressure booster requirements are also very specific to ASHRAE, so make sure you check those out. And again, there is a whole separate presentation that covers service water heating electrification provisions in detail, and that will be posted to denvergov.org/energy code. Last one, power and lighting section probably contains the most differences. There are a handful of lighting control differences, such as how daylighting zones are defined and how exterior lights should be turned on and off. Something unique to ASHRAE requirements is that dwelling units do not require dimming like they do under the IECC. Teams only need to follow the minimum efficacy requirements. There are also some slight difference between IECC and ASHRAE energy monitoring requirements. Both will apply, and if they conflict, just use the more stringent of the two, but you'll find that most projects align. All right, we're going to do a quickie overview of commissioning and envelope verification. These requirements are also the same no matter which pathway you choose. When is system commissioning required? Mechanical and service water heating systems must be commissioned when the total mechanical equipment capacity is 480,000 BTUH or more of cooling capacity, or the combined service water heating and space heating capacity is over 600,000 BTUH. Systems that serve individual dwelling units and sleeping units are exempt from that total. Systems in existing buildings where the area of work is less than 10,000 square feet are also exempt. Lighting systems must be commissioned when the new installed lighting is 20 kilowatts or greater and the area of work is 10,000 square feet or more. Now, if you're paying attention, you will see that my slide says 10 kilowatts. So this is your official heads up that there is a plan to update this threshold from 20 kilowatts to 10 kilowatts. That's one of those things that Linda mentioned. So check for those approved updates coming soon in June. Existing buildings undergoing a major equipment replacement of the same capacity thresholds of C408.2 will require commissioning when most of the devices directly connected to that equipment are also being replaced, such as in a complete floor demolition. And of course, commissioning must be done by a Colorado licensed professional or approved agency. The commissioning agent does need to be in place at the time of permit with qualifications noted on your checklist. And that person needs to have at least one of the following qualifications. They could have at least 2 years of experience commissioning projects of a similar scale and complexity, and they are a licensed professional engineer designation in the state of Colorado. Or they can have a building commissioning certification from an ISO IECC 17024 accredited agency or another entity that certifies building commissioning professionals. Or they can have staff credentials that are recognized by the Building Commissioning Association, such as a certified commissioning professional, CCP, or equivalent. The commissioning compliance checklist found in the Denver Energy Code is what documents the commissioning process. Here's a little screenshot of it on our slide here. It summarizes the results of the commissioning process for not only the HVAC systems, but also lighting and service water heating equipment. Typically, before functional testing of HVAC equipment, test and balance contractor performs that testing and adjustment of the airflows and water flows for all major equipment to ensure that the systems are operating as indicated on the construction drawings. What is envelope verification and who can perform this? An approved agency here responsible for the execution of the building enclosure commissioning process must have at least one of the following qualifications. They could be a building enclosure commissioning certification from that same ISO IECC 17024 accredited agency, or another entity that certifies building enclosure commissioning professionals, or they can have staff credentials such as the Accredited Commissioning Authority and Building Enclosure, which is a CXA-BE, Building Enclosure Commissioning Process Provider, which is a BE-CXP, or a Certified Building Enclosure Commissioning Provider, CBE-CXP. That is a lot of initials. Important to note that prior to the blower door testing for either C402.5.2 or 3, the air barrier still needs to be inspected. And this happens at rough while the air barrier is accessible and still has the potential for correction. Envelope verification requirements of the 2022 Denver Energy Code are very similar to the 2021 IECC, except that Denver has removed a few exceptions for requirements of testing, such that all new commercial buildings will require testing. New envelope assemblies and alteration require testing. Now, repairs, roof cover, and roof replacement are still exempt from testing. For C402.5.2, that's dwelling and sleeping unit enclosure testing, sampling is permitted, just like under the 2021 IECC for 8 units or more, though you must include at least one top floor unit, one ground floor unit, and your largest unit. Then at project completion, you'll need to submit a report with testing results identifying any corrective action taken. The link we have here is going to take you to the construction phase resources section under denvergov.org/energy code. And there's all kinds of goodies there for construction resources. So speaking of corrective action for air sealing, air leakage testing language has been modified in the new code to now require that the measured air leakage to be at or below a CFM per square foot target. Then how much action needs to be taken will depend on your test results as shown in this table. So how to prepare for this? Definitely encourage you to pay close attention to air sealing details in drawings and materials and specifications. Make sure you identify that entity who's doing the air leakage testing, integrate them into the design and construction schedule. You'll want to conduct that air barrier review early enough in design to make any updates in the drawings and specifications. And then, of course, understand what the corrective requirements are, what the consequences are here. And as I mentioned, you'll find a lot more information on air sealing in some upcoming commercial contractor and inspector trainings. All right, this takes us to the modeling details section. Let's talk about Appendix PT first. So PT, as you know, stands for performance target, meaning you are designing the building to meet a certain energy performance target, or EUI. This is a handy method for several reasons. As we noted earlier, there is no baseline model needed, which simplifies the modeling process. So while it's only available for certain building types, you can also use it for combinations of those building types. So for example, a mixed use project with multifamily, retail, restaurant, and a parking garage could absolutely use this method. The other primary reason that teams might want to consider this pathway is because the modeling procedures and EUI targets align really nicely with Energize Denver goals, meaning that teams can simply think about their operational energy use when making design decisions, and they know that they will be set up for success for future Energize Denver ordinance performance compliance requirements, as well as being compliant with the Denver Energy Code. Speaking of rules and procedures, the performance target methodology does have some unique rules that we would like to point out. So as you can imagine, if we are to design to a standardized target EUI, these must be based on some standardized conditions. So these include both reference schedules and reference loads, as shown in these tables here. We also want to make sure to use standardized weather files and ensure we have accounted for the altitude effects on HVAC efficiency. So this link here will take you to Denver's modeling rules and procedures. And if you don't want to wait for the PDF version of this presentation, want to go find this document now, it lives in the same place as the checklist. And I will show you where all of that is found on Denver's website once we get to our demo. For projects considering utilizing the other two performance paths that do have a baseline, Section C407 and Appendix SE, the baseline reference model itself will be exactly the same. Only the compliance metrics and calculations will be different. This makes for simpler analysis during the design phase for teams wanting to evaluate different design options, fuel sources, and compliance options. Under these two pathways, the energy models will define both the regulated loads and the unregulated loads. Regulated loads are the energy uses that are regulated by the Energy Code: space heating, cooling, fans, lighting, water heating, pool boilers, etc. The unregulated loads are everything else, like plug loads and process loads. Then the ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G modeling methodology uses building performance factors to set targets for how much the building's regulated loads need to be reduced. Then the proposed design simply needs to have energy costs or site energy be less than our target using this formula here. But what is a building performance factor? Like, if you look at that, what does it really mean? A building performance factor defines by how much you need to reduce your regulated loads. Denver has amended tables with building performance factors for both Section C407 and Appendix SE. And as you can see, there are also 2 columns for each, one for all electric properties and one for all other buildings. And there are 2 different tables for C407 and Appendix SE. If you're looking closely here at our table, you will note that the building performance factors for all electric properties are higher, meaning compliance is easier. This is another way that Denver's new energy code is helping to incentivize building electrification. So to think about these, what they mean here, we've got a couple examples of how to think about building performance factors. If your project is following Section C407, a building performance factor of 0.78, that the building's regulated energy cost must be reduced by 22%. If the project is following Appendix SE, building performance factor of 0.71 means that the building's regulated site energy must be reduced by 29%. Both C407 and Appendix SE compliance paths, again, use that same energy model with the same baseline regulated and unregulated loads. So it's really easy for the team to compare all options under these different metrics. So then, how do these metrics work when your team is considering the energy savings options for Green Buildings Ordinance compliance? What a great question. You would apply your savings goal to your target cost, target energy use, or your performance target EUI. For example, if your savings goal is to be 12% better than the code, you simply multiply your target times 0.88. So note that starting in October, new construction projects that want to use either the 5% better or 12% better Green Buildings Ordinance options must also be an all-electric property. What about existing buildings? Why, yes, you can use the performance path for existing buildings, and it really is a great option. Let's look into that. Performance compliance can be used for additions, alterations, as well as projects that are a change of occupancy or use. As a reminder, a change of occupancy or use is a project that is changing to a higher energy demand category, as per this table here in C505.1, such as a Group S warehouse that is being converted to a Group M grocery store. So you can see it goes to a higher energy demand category. Now, existing buildings are slightly more complicated, that they will have different compliance requirements depending on the scope of the project, but performance compliance can make overall compliance much simpler for teams than doing prescriptive compliance, especially if you have a project that is a combination of one or more types of projects, such as an alteration plus an addition, which is quite common. You can find more details on these requirements on Denver's website under the web page that is dedicated specifically to alterations and additions. And that lives under denvergov.org/energy code. Starting to sound like a broken record there, but we got all kinds of goodies. So let's review alterations that would fall under Section 503 first. These are alterations with no change of use or space conditioning. We would generally follow Section C407 modeling protocol. And we have some flexibility there, as well as some special energy modeling rules. We must meet the C407.2 mandatory requirements, except we don't have to meet that minimum insulation backstop that we discussed earlier. Anything that is unaltered, we can either exclude it from the energy models, or we can model it identically in the baseline and the proposed. If you know the efficiencies of your existing equipment or envelope, you can model it like that and take credit for the upgrades that you make. If not, you can use the Section C407 baseline. Then you have another option here. You can document compliance in one of 2 ways. You can either demonstrate that your alteration does not increase the energy cost or energy use relative to your existing building, or you can follow the traditional C407 or Appendix SE protocol with the aforementioned building performance factors, and then you apply an extra 10% allowance to your energy cost or site energy use target. Now, if you're thinking, about this, you might realize that using the C407 or Appendix SE option would be a more challenging compliance route, and you would be right. But this method can be really useful if you have a combo project, like an alteration combined with an addition again, which is quite common. And this method would allow you to use one big energy model to encompass both project portions and can simplify the compliance process for you. You just have to do a little fancy math to scale your target by the percentage of the project that is an alteration. Along those same lines, projects that are a change of occupancy to a higher energy demand category can also use the performance path. Just like before, we follow standard C407 modeling protocol, and then we apply that extra 10% allowance to our energy cost or energy use target. So just like with C503 alterations on the previous slide, this can also be used for combination projects and can really help you to simplify documentation. All right, now let's run through what those energy modeling rules are, and we're going to get really nerdy, so bear with me. We're going to start by defining our baseline. As I mentioned, both C407 and Appendix SE have the same baseline, which is really helpful. And also, you should know that the Appendix G baseline is a terribly inefficient building. It is basically what our code baseline was in 2004. Terrible envelope, terrible lighting, and really poor HVAC efficiencies. Also know that the HVAC baseline fuel source is defined by the climate zone. So for Denver, that means an all gas HVAC baseline. By the way, this is why Denver added Appendix SE, so that teams can comply by site energy savings relative to that really terrible gas baseline. Service water heating fuel source is going to vary by building type, so you'll need to look that up. For example, multifamily projects would have a gas service water heating baseline, and offices would have electric resistance. Some project types will also have a varying baseline for the window to wall area ratio, as shown in this table. Lastly, and very important, make sure you are pulling those baseline efficiencies for envelope lighting, HVAC, etc., from the special tables in Appendix G, not the prescriptive tables that are in the earlier chapters of the ASHRAE standard. Energy modelers will then select the HVAC baseline by following these rules, which might be a little different from what we are used to. The primary baseline is determined by the building type with the largest floor area first. Then you select the baseline by the end use, number of floors, and gross condition floor area. You can apply additional baselines for non-predominant conditions, such as non-residential, if your largest use is residential, if those conditions exceed 20,000 square feet. You can potentially use yet another baseline if you have a VAV baseline and you have a zone with significantly differing loads or hours. And of course, you can always use a separate baseline for heated only spaces. So while defining a second, third, or even fourth baseline is entirely optional and can be done at the modeler's discretion, it will almost always benefit a project to make this extra effort. Let's look at an example of a project with multiple baselines. Here is a fairly large-ish multifamily project. How would we go about selecting our baseline or baselines? The first baseline is easy. It's residential. So that's a system 1, hot water PTAC. Then we can pull out a second baseline for our non-residential space because it exceeds 20,000 square feet. Based on its size and number of floors, this would be a system 5, which is a packaged VAV with hot water heating and reheat. Next, I think I'd like to use a third baseline for my restaurant because it can be pulled out from that system 5 baseline as a space with significantly differing loads. Finally, then we'll pull out our heated only spaces for our stairwells and other back of house areas in their own baseline, giving me 4 total baselines. Modeling the envelope baseline is relatively straightforward, but a fun thing in ASHRAE is that it has a semi-heated space category. Semi-heated spaces are those with a heating system capacity between 3.4 and 12 BTUH per square foot. If that space is above 12, it should be considered a regularly conditioned space, even if it is heated only. Now, if you use a semi-heated space category in your energy models, ASHRAE would have some rules about what they call semi-exterior envelope elements, which are the parts of your envelope between the semi-heated and the fully conditioned spaces. But those parts of ASHRAE are not part of Denver's mandatory requirements, so you do not need to worry about them. Now you might be wondering, do future tenant spaces that might only have minimal temporary heat count as semi-heated? You might think so, but no. Future tenant spaces have to be considered fully conditioned spaces, whether or not that MEP equipment is included with your permit. Next, let's review how do we model infiltration, because this is new and I will tell you it tripped me up. ASHRAE 90.1 2019 Appendix G is the first modeling protocol I have seen that has infiltration modeled differently between the baseline and the proposed. So understanding the modeling protocol for infiltration is important. If you want to read all the nerdy details about this, you can find the DO2 modeling protocol by following this link to the PNNL infiltration modeling guidelines for commercial buildings. But for the energy modelers here today, all you really need to know is that there are 4 coefficients, A, B, C, and D, that can be defined by users to take into account the effect of microclimate conditions of temperature and wind speed at each simulation time step. And you'll want to set those infiltration coefficients in your preferred software such that it follows this DO2 infiltration methodology. Another setting in your software, infiltration can be modeled as a function of either floor area or above grade wall area using these formulas that you can find in Appendix G. You can choose either one as long as you use these formulas. That I-75 PA is the air leakage of the thermal envelope at 0.3 inches of water column or 75 pascals. Next, as I mentioned, we will model baseline and proposed infiltration at different rates. We also had lots of discussion about this. The baseline infiltration rate from Appendix G is 1.0 CFM per square foot of envelope. The updates in the June 2023 version of the Denver Energy Code will simplify the proposed infiltration rates from Appendix G for us, such that we will always use 0.4 CFM per square foot in the proposed model for both C407 energy cost and Appendix SE site energy. Now, this may benefit some projects which will have higher actual leakage rates, but it simplifies the modeling process. Finally, infiltration needs to be modeled on a schedule that follows the fan operation, such that infiltration is set to 0.25 when the fans are on and 1.0 when the fans are off. Also, if you were paying attention when we talked about energy modeling rules for multifamily ventilation, remember how we said that we were to model multifamily system fans as running continuously? Yes, that means we need to set our multifamily infiltration schedule to be always at 0.25. Another fun thing in Appendix G is that we can claim savings for service water heating load reduction. This is particularly great for projects with higher water heating loads like multifamily. You can claim savings for low flow plumbing fixtures. Just make sure that your baseline references the maximum flow rates from the Denver Plumbing Code as shown here in this table. You can also claim savings from high efficiency Energy Star appliances, both commercial and residential. So the link here will take you to the Energy Star website for commercial kitchen equipment. And on that website, you'll find a handy calculator for upgrades to Energy Star commercial equipment relative to its non-Energy Star counterpoint that you can use to quantify those energy savings, or excuse me, the water heating savings. The second link takes you to the Energy Star multifamily modeling protocol document, which does the same thing. It quantifies those savings for residential Energy Star appliances, as well as the modeling protocol that can be used to claim savings. Note that this applies only to service water heating reduction, not the corresponding equipment electric load reduction, which currently does need to be modeled identically in both baseline and proposed. One of the few modifications to Appendix G that Denver has made is how much on-site renewable energy can be used to meet performance path requirements. While standard Appendix G says that you can offset up to 5% of your energy costs by renewable energy, the Denver Energy Code has modified this such that you can offset up to 10% of your energy cost or site energy. This can also be used for Appendix PT performance target. Now, this language and formula here in my blue box, kind of hard to understand, but that's really all it is saying, that you can offset up to 10% of your target with renewable energy. Now, in order to claim these savings for compliance, you must have a fully designed PV array ready to permit. Your photovoltaic designer must have modeled the array and calculated the annual kilowatt-hour production using a software such as Helioscope or PV Watts. Also, that system must be owned, leased, or be under contract to purchase the energy generated for a minimum of 15 years. Now, a quick note for our reviewers and inspectors on this topic. Most of the proposed design will be inspected by comparing installed equipment to permit documents. However, renewable energy requires that reviewer to flag the inspector. This is because the system might be designed and installed separately from the rest of the project. So the reviewer will enter that renewable energy in the scope of works box on the permit. And then the inspector will look for the required renewable energy and issue that TCO until this is complete. All right, now let's put all this new knowledge into action and look at some case studies. Here's our first one. This is an example of a pretty low energy office building. Our Appendix G baseline here is an all gas VAV system with DX cooling. And our proposed design considers both an all electric option as well as a mixed fuel option. And there's some energy recovery built into both, along with some really great lighting and lighting controls. With our single baseline, we can consider both C407 and Appendix SE. Note that Appendix PT is not compared here because it was not modeled with those standardized schedules. So heating is that big red bar in both of my charts here. So when we're looking at the energy costs on the chart on the left, you can see there's really not much difference between the two since the costs are dominated by that electric reheat. But you can see a distinct EUI difference in heating on the EUI chart on the right between the all electric and gas option. Let's see how the results look. Since this analysis considers both all electric and mixed fuel options, we get to look at both C407 and Appendix SE. So we have 4 building performance factors to use, but still just one baseline. So not surprising, compliance by energy cost is a really terrible option for this project since we are dominated by that electric heat. So we'll just cross that one out. But compliance by site energy actually looks pretty good for both options. But since this project would need to comply with the Denver Green Buildings Ordinance, they could use that all electric option to meet both energy code compliance and Green Buildings Ordinance compliance. Little motivation to go all electric. Next, let's look at a restaurant. This happens to be an energy dense sort of fast food restaurant. Our baseline here is a gas-fired rooftop unit. And we have only one proposed design under consideration, which is a relatively high efficiency gas rooftop unit. Now for the results. Unfortunately, our restaurant does not meet either C407 or Appendix SE requirements with its current design. So this analysis evaluates how much PV photovoltaics would be required to meet both pathways. Excuse me. For sizing purposes, we used a generic rule of thumb that every kilowatt of PV generates roughly 1,400 kilowatt hours per year. So when looking at the photovoltaics required, it looks like the C407 pathway would be the preferred path because it has the smaller PV requirement. However, the C407 analysis shows that the project is at negative 12% savings, which exceeds the amount of savings we can claim for PV. So unless this team can squeeze out another 2% energy cost savings, we have to throw this option out. And then we would go with Appendix SE. So with Appendix SE, we would just need to add roughly 35 kilowatts of photovoltaics in order to comply. Our last case study here is a multifamily project. Our primary baseline is our gas-fired hot water PTAC with our non-residential spaces using a baseline of gas VAV, hot water heating and reheat, and DX cooling. This project also has a pool with a gas boiler that we must consider as a regulated load. Then this analysis evaluates 3 proposed design options. The first is all gas with hydronic heating and central gas domestic hot water. The second is a mixed fuel option, which keeps the central gas water heating, but changes the HVAC to split heat pumps. The third is an all-electric option using those same split heat pumps from option 2, but changing to a central heat pump water heating system. Note that even though this project has an all-electric and HVAC and water heating option, it cannot use the all-electric building performance factors because it still uses gas for those outdoor pool boilers. So you can see here in our charts, our energy use and costs are definitely more varied, and it is evidence that the energy costs increase somewhat with more electrification, but the EUI also goes down. Also note the pool energy cost and energy use, which is shown in that light blue color, is a significant impact on the results of both methodologies for this project. Now to the results. As mentioned, we can only use the mixed fuel building performance factors for this project. And the better compliance methodology here is clearly Appendix SE, with the 2 more electrified options as being viable. However, this team also should look at their site EUI and consider how the project might perform going more electrified for future Energized Denver Ordinance 2030 EUI targets. All right, now that we have a good understanding on the modeling requirements, we are going to talk about the reporting requirements. After I get a drink. Okay. First, due to the rigor of the energy modeling protocol, as we mentioned, your energy modeler is required to have that ASHRAE Building Energy Modeling Professional certification. The ASHRAE website has a list of certified professionals all across the country, as well as information on how you can become accredited. Denver is using the DOE PNNL 90.1 tool suite to form the basis of compliance. Excuse me. First, let's recognize that adopting the 90.1 Appendix G performance rating method is a more rigorous protocol than the standard IECC C407 used in the previous code cycle. And the core of 90.1 Appendix G is made Denver specific. Therefore, a robust and updated energy modeling report is needed. The good news here is that the report uses the DOE PNNL 90.1 tool suite, which is actively supported with software development and technical assistance through the DOE and the PNNL. And it provides modelers a platform where code compliance models and other models like LEED use the same reporting. So there are two parts to our report using 2 separate Excel workbooks. The first is the 90.1 compliance form, where the basic 90.1 Appendix G information is entered. This file can also be used to document LEED energy compliance. Model results can be copied in for a wide array of simulation software, so at least this step of data entry is eliminated. Then there is an export function that gets the model information over to our second workbook, the 2022 Denver Energy Code companion tool for compliance with the 2022 Denver Energy Code and Green Buildings Ordinance energy options. Both files are required for our submittals. Now, as mentioned earlier, updates to the Denver Energy Code are up for City Council approval in June 2023 here in a couple of weeks. An updated 2022 companion tool will be available soon. And I think Linda just mentioned that it might be available today. But we always recommend that you download a fresh version from the website for every project just to make sure that you pick up the latest version. So how does this work? The 90.1 compliance form holds the ASHRAE 90.1 2019 information. Then the energy model results are imported into the 90.1 compliance form from your preferred simulation tool. The compliance form also includes both the BEMP certification information and the EUI, which are required by the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Next, the model information is exported from the 90.1 compliance tool via a CSV file and then imported into the 2022 companion tool. Lots of tools. You will select whether the project is all electric and whether you are demonstrating compliance with any of the Denver Green Buildings Ordinance energy savings options. Then the custom BPF for the project, building performance factor, is calculated in the companion tool to account for multiple building types and new versus renovations. Then the companion tool will verify energy code compliance. It will also calculate whether you are in compliance with the Denver Green Buildings Ordinance if you have selected one of the energy savings options. So it does all that work for you. Your energy code checklist and green buildings ordinance checklist will also be put onto your drawings separately. The star here that we have under my last row of the table is to remind me that to tell you that while envelope lighting, HVAC, service water heating, and process information can be put into the 90.1 compliance form, it is a lot more rigorous than the previous report. So at least for a limited time, Denver will also accept Table 2, comparison of proposed design versus baseline design from the previous commercial energy code modeling report, which is a simple PDF file. Denver is in the process of considering longer-term alternates to the compliance form for this information. And I'll show you what all of this looks like when we do our demonstration here shortly. Your final energy model submittal package is going to include these items in a zip file with permit. You'll have your energy model report files. These are the two spreadsheets that form the basis of compliance documentation just discussed, as well as any accompanying documentation using 2019 Commercial Energy Modeling Protocol Report Table 2, again a PDF. Then you'll have input and output reports from your energy simulation, and please make that export in IP units. Denver accepts all simulation software platforms that meet the ASHRAE standard 140. Make sure you note the energy rates that have been used, if you have any exceptional calculations, and any information on your on-site renewables if you're using those. This could be, for example, a letter from the owner with a summary of the contract or lease agreement. Also, if any adjacent buildings or topology shades the building such that it impacts your energy use, please include that information in the site plan as well. Then you'll name that zip file following Denver's naming convention here and upload it with your permit package. All right, now it is time for the demonstration, which you have all been waiting for. So first thing, I want to show you where to find everything. So now I'm going to switch away from my PowerPoint and start navigating to some other files. So let's see if I can make this work. All right, here is the spot on the website where you're going to find those links to the energy modeling reports, energy modeling rules and procedures and stuff. So as I mentioned, you go to denvergov.org/building code, which will bring up this website. And you'll click on energy code checklists. The checklists live then under the 2022 checklists. And you'll see we've got both our prescriptive and our performance. We have a handy dandy link to go to the 90.1 Appendix G compliance form. And then we have our companion tool here as well. This is also, as I mentioned earlier, where you find the PDF that has Denver's modeling rules and procedures. While we're in here, this is also where you would find a link to last code cycle's commercial energy code modeling report, if you wanted to use that as supplementary documentation for the Table 2 information in that report. All right, now let's go to our demo. And I'm going to open up some spreadsheets. So first, we're going to look at part 1 of the energy modeling report, which is our 90.1 tool. And I'm going to start way over here on the instructions tab. Lots of good information on here that you can follow. We've got handy dandy links here that take you down to different sections. So take your time and explore that. I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but I want to show you the most important tabs. The first place to start here is your general information tab. Let's make that a little bigger so you can see. Here's where you enter your selected code year, your energy model information, general information, and most importantly here, your table 1, your building areas. So this is where you're selecting and indicating your conditioned floor area. If you're using any of that semi-heated space category or any spaces not enclosed or unconditioned, like if you have an unconditioned parking garage, for example. It's really easy to add rows and delete rows in here. And then this is what's used to then populate for your different building performance factors based on your building area types. So really make sure you get this section dialed in. The contact information is important here because this is where you define who is your lead energy modeler. And let me get this one a little bit bigger too. And who is carrying that ASHRAE BEMP certification. You don't have to enter all 4 people here, just who's in charge. The next one over here, let's move over to the energy sources tab. The important stuff here is your table 1 energy sources and your table 2, your energy cost, your charges here. The source site ratio and emissions are not used for Denver's compliance path, so that's optional. But I think it goes in there for you if you're interested in it, kind of handy. The envelope areas tab is another one that is critical. Make this a little bit bigger here. But the only super critical item on here is actually way down at the bottom. Scroll way down. And it's this baseline orientation and rotation section. So you just need to indicate if you're using the average for rotation baseline here, which would be most typical, or if you're using one of these exceptions and you're not doing a rotated baseline. So this, for example, if your project is not required to simulate 4 baseline orientations, if you're perhaps a really urban site, your site is oriented a certain way and you have no other options for how to orient your building, you can potentially use this exception. So that's where you would note that. Infiltration tab, as we mentioned, we have these specific infiltration modeling requirements. And this is where we would describe both our baseline and proposed, as well as the infiltration modeling method. As I mentioned, you can model either by wall area, floor area, total building envelope area, as long as you're following those Appendix G formulas. And then Denver would also like you to acknowledge the modeling protocol here with the coefficients and the schedules. Next one, critical tab. We're going to scroll all the way over to renewable energy. And this is if you're using renewable energy to document compliance, this is the table that you want to fill out, including that annual electricity generation in kilowatt hours. The most important thing to enter into this table is the results from your energy modeling software. Back over on the general information tab, you would select your energy modeling software. This one happens to show a demonstration with eQuest, but it's got all kinds of different options there. You'll follow the instructions for the various softwares about what file to find and how to import it. But I tried this with ours. We use OpenStudio and it's quite easy. Last one here, we'll go back to then the dashboard tab. Way over here. And then you do the final fun, where you export the XML and CSV. So a handy little link here to get you down to the bottom. You go ahead and you click the export data button, and it is exporting it now for me just now. And it throws that XML and CSV file into the same folder wherever you have stored or saved your 90.1 compliance form. So that's the good stuff. Now we're going to move to part 2, which is the 2022 Denver Energy Code Companion Tool. So I'm going to move over to this other spreadsheet. So again, we've got some nice instructions, and this is what is going to be continued to be updated here, just to add some more clarification and detail. So you can always make sure to go and get the newest version of this tool from Denver's website whenever you start a new project. It will give you instructions on how to import that data into the compliance form. So this is where we would go. We would select that CSV file and import it here, which I'm not going to do because Linda already did it for me. But it gives you instructions on how to do that. And then it's going to populate this project performance tab for you, and you can go right over to the Denver reporting summary tab. So table 1A is where you need to fill out some information. You'll want to select things like whether the project contains an addition. You can select yes or no. If you are targeting one of the green buildings ordinance energy paths, you can select both the threshold as well as whether it's a yes or a no. And then you'll note whether it's an all electric property. This one happens to not be an all electric property. A fun little thing that's built in, it is, a bit error proof here, in that if I was trying to use either maybe the 5% or 12% better options for green buildings ordinance, the tool would say, no, you can't do that. This is only for projects that are all electric. And it would give you a nice warning there. But you are allowed to use this for the either the 2.5 or the 6% options, because those are for different projects. All right, let's see. Some other things to point out in here are the multiplier. So if you've got those combination projects, remember how handy those are, with new construction and alterations, this would be populated from your other tool over here with new construction and alterations. And here's where it applies that extra 10% allowance. Then it does the fancy math for you here, and you get now a weighted multiplier that would get applied to your target. So again, it's doing all of that math for you, just handy. Then this tab also summarizes all of your compliance. So you can scroll down and explore this and see, how do things look? How do we look for compliance by C407? Pretty good. We get to 16.1% energy cost savings before photovoltaics and 21.6 after. We can also look at how our compliance with Appendix SE looks. Also good. We're at 8.7% before solar and 12.5% after. This project happens to be pretty fabulous, as it is also compliant with its Appendix PT performance target. So the tool calculates what that target is for us. For this project, it happens to be 38.23, and we are compliant with and without solar for this one. And then it also summarizes that for us. If we meet more than one method, it lets us know, so you don't have to choose. And then there's some other good information down in here. So definitely encourage you to explore this as you get to know it. Now, as a reviewer, you can use the tabs in the compliance form to cross-check proposed design energy model or parameters to the design and the permit. So let's go back to, oops, there we go back to our 90.1 tool. All the other tabs in here have lots of good opportunity to enter information, but these are also optional, and currently we can still use that table too. So if it's helpful to you to use these tables here in the 9.1 tool, please do so. And then reviewers can look for the documentation here. And this is pretty handy here if you don't already have this elsewhere, to just fill things out here. And reviewers can look for, table 1 here is for all of our opaque assemblies, and then scroll down to table 2, and we've got fenestration showing our proposed assembly U factors and whatnot. The HVAC tab is also handy and has a lot of great information here. So scrolling over here to the proposed HVAC. This is a really big tab, so all the links that they've got here, little hot links that can take you over to the chilled water plant and the cooling plant and things like that to enter in information. Also, way over here to the left, it gives you the ASHRAE 90.1 minimum allowed efficiencies. So these are our federal minimum efficiencies, not our baselines. But there is a baseline HVAC Appendix G tab. So if you have determined your baseline here and you want to enter those in, as well as quantity and capacity, it will look up what those baseline efficiencies are for you. So you don't have to go look them up from ASHRAE yourself. It'll give you unitary efficiency, modeled efficiency, as well as full load efficiency. So that's kind of handy. Same thing on the service water heating tab. You can enter in your proposed systems here, efficiency units, and it'll help you determine some of those model parameters, as well as just help you document those things. All right, so as we said earlier, for reviewers, verifying that all electric property does go further than not just using fossil fuels in the energy model, and then checking that there's no permanently installed fossil fuel equipment and utility connection. But you can also do a quick check in the energy results to see where this is reported. And it is reported in this tool. So now let's scroll over to our compliance calculations tab. And again, let's make this one a little bit bigger so you can see my screen. We've got things imported here like our unmet hours, which always are important to pay attention to. And then it pulls in our energy use from the results that we imported from our tool. So a pretty easy scan here to see, miscellaneous equipment that's got gas usage, and if we don't have any modeled in there. Clearly this one is not an all electric property here because we do have natural gas for both space heating and water heating, but it's a nice place to see where you can see the results. Just as a heads up here, in this compliance calculations tab, if you scroll down and you look at table 6 and 7 here, this table 7 and table 6, this building performance factor, are not for Denver. These are not for us. So we have modified our building performance factors such that this is not valid. So do not pay any attention to this table that says you're compliant, because we have to use our companion tool to document that, because this, of course, is the unamended Appendix G. All right, now I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here and just point out just a couple other handy things for you. If you wanted to use the old reporting table that I showed you from the 2019 Commercial Energy Modeling Report, and if you want to use that in place of entering the envelope, lighting, HVAC, service water heating, and or process loads into the 90.1 compliance form, these are the minimum inputs that will be required in the 90.1 compliance form. It's the absolute minimum required for the Denver submittal and will also ensure a successful CSV export and then import into the companion tool. So we are going to add this under the companion tool instructions. And as I showed you, you can find that template under the 2019 checklist section. But I would recommend that to ensure a successful review with CPD, I think you'll want to expand that table to include all information that is required to be documented under 90.1 Appendix G. And I think that'll make sense when you start to look at that relative to the Appendix G table requirements. Okay, we are almost to the end and we've got a lot of good time for Q&A. So quick summary, we can use one of 4 pathways to comply with the 2022 Denver Energy Code. Prescriptive, or our 3 performance paths. We have C407, energy cost, Appendix SE by site energy, and Appendix PT, performance target. And of course, we just talked about all the performance paths. The successful permit submittals will include both the energy code checklists, compliance documentation with our nicely zipped energy model submittal package, and construction documents that'll show how we're meeting all of these requirements. And I think it was pretty evident from this presentation that the new updates to the 2022 Denver Energy Code absolutely are designed to support electrification, including in our performance pathways. Just a reminder, for all of our new key provisions for all pathways are the partial electrification for space and water heating that are effective in January 2024. We've got demand responsive water heating, electric ready, and a whole permit process parity for alterations that replace furnaces, and unitary air conditioning for heated spaces and service water heating. There are a lot more great presentations that get into building electrification, so highly recommend checking those things out. I think this particular presentation just barely scratches the surface on some of those new provisions. So be sure to check out those other presentations. Okay, that takes us to the Q&A section.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
And I hope we have lots of great questions.
Yeah, and we've seen folks utilizing the Q&A function throughout the webinar. So we appreciate y'all's questions, and hopefully you're getting the answers to those. So as we shift into the Q&A portion of today's event, please continue to utilize that function at the bottom of your screen. Ask us any and all questions you have while we have CPD staff with us to answer those. And so I see Mark has a question on here that Linda's going to answer. And our first question that we'll get to is, would a property that has a gas-fired generator to provide power for all electric comfort heat during a power outage, rather than life safety functions, be considered all electric? Linda, can you help us out with that one?
Right on. Yeah, we've had a couple questions come through in the chat about different times when there might be gas equipment at a building or at the property, and would that comply with that all electric property definition? And I think the question about the pool water heater being gas, I think that's probably common in the marketplace, that we don't have a great substitute products at the moment. So probably pools for the time being will be heated by gas. That doesn't comply with that all electric property definition. Same for interior appliances, whether they're cooking or fireplaces or things like that. And then Mark slices this even a little bit more finely, saying that there's a generator which is not limited to just life safety functions, emergency or standby, but provides comfort heating through electric backup. And alas, that would also kick us out of that all electric property definition. So a good thing for teams to be thinking about, and also a good thing for reviewers to think about as we're evaluating whether the project has met the full intent of that all electric property.
John's throwing a bunch of questions in the chat, but I think it's just one question. So what about infrared heaters that are gas on a patio? And Linda, can I try this one? And you can
Sure,
check
you
me.
do it.
So we're looking at permanently installed equipment. So if these are maybe like those propane heaters that you see at restaurants, that would not preclude this building from being considered all electric. But if it's got gas lines running to these heaters, then it would not be considered all electric. How'd I do, Linda?
That's exactly it. Yep.
Gosh, it's like I've been practicing. Okay, another question I have is, do I need to provide EV spaces regardless of which performance path I choose?
Yes, yes, you will need to provide EV spaces. So let's see, we went through some of those requirements. Maybe Elizabeth, if you're not there already, slide 32 would be a handy one, because that gets into, we're taking a reference that shows up in C407.2, which has those things that we're going to reference from the prescriptive code or Denver specific amendments. And they are also included as mandatory requirements for the performance path. So here we are, 504.13 is EV spaces are required, as is the rest of these, the plant growth, energy monitoring, solar ready requirements, and electric infrastructure. So if you did not take a look at the electrification, that could be helpful for some of the times that electrification is in. That's a separate presentation, or take a look through these provisions when they're mandatory requirements included in the code.
Okay, and as is custom in Q&A sessions, one one question inspires another. So Ron wants to know, we had a question earlier about offsite modular construction, and participants, you should be able to see the answered questions. I don't know exactly what y'all get to see, but should be able to see the answers that we respond to. But for offsite modular construction, if the project utilizes a central boiler for domestic hot water in the modular units, above a podium, and that boiler is considered site built, located under the podium, how does that boiler get modeled?
I think I might be able to answer this one, and unless CPD, you guys have opinions, because I think I just gave you one of these. Yeah, no, modular construction is really interesting because we actually have a combination of code regulations. The offsite modular portion of the project is actually regulated by the state. So the modular construction falls under the state code, which happens to be 2021 IECC, which is kind of convenient because there's some good parallels. Anything that is not isolated within the modular units themselves then is regulated under the Denver Energy Code, and then would follow those. So I would model that boiler as being regulated under the Denver Energy Code, but the loads, because they're on a central boiler, I would include as a part of that. Now in the past, just because this has gotten really complicated, what I've proposed to CPD, now they might change their minds, is that but for both the state and Denver, I modeled the whole building, and I just made sure that the whole building met both code requirements, and that seemed to make everybody happy. So I demonstrated that the whole building, including the modular components, met the Denver Energy Code, and the same thing that the whole building, including the non-modular components, met the state code. And that did make everyone happy, and if it worked before, I'm hoping it will work again. If I had to separate those, I would still keep the load under the boiler, which would be regulated under the Denver code portion, and then exclude that from my state code model if I had to separate them. So you can give that a try and see if it works again.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach for modeling. And if there are projects that are getting into complexities and nuanced, and you want to float an approach, please feel free to reach out at any time. The email address is energyreview@denvergov.org.
Okay, and another question I have, can I use Appendix PT, the performance target path, if my building is a warehouse? And Linda's, I think this one is for you.
Yeah, let's do that. So Appendix PT is for just a few different building types, and Elizabeth is going to take us over to that slide. It's 40, I think.
There it is.
Yeah, there we go. So that question was about a warehouse building type. That's not one of the allowed types. We just have the apartment, hotel, motel, office, retail, restaurant, bar, and allowance for parking garages. And there's also an allowance for swimming pools.
Great, and I'm just going to keep rolling here. Why would I choose site appendix over the energy cost appendix?
The energy cost appendix always is going to be compared to a natural gas baseline in our area. That's a pretty inexpensive utility source. And so that's the rationale for having a site energy modification to that, is so that we can look at electrifying buildings because of the benefits. The benefits are wide ranging and really are the way that we get to our overall greenhouse gas emissions targets. So it's preferred for that building that is either all electric or a mixed fuel and includes, partial electrification.
Yeah, I think that this multifamily example is a good one. I think we could, if this project wanted to go with an all gas option, I think we could find a way to make it follow or meet the requirements under either C407, which would be by energy cost, or by Appendix SE. But it would have to work pretty hard, squeezing out another 4% energy costs or even energy savings is hard, because I had already modeled this pretty optimistically and with some fairly aggressive goals. And meanwhile, the hybrid option, which is just changing those fan coils from hydronic heat to heat pump, which is fairly minimal cost, and poof, we are compliant under Appendix SE under energy savings. I'll also share, just in our experience so far, we've been working on a lot of different building types. I think that there's still some options for projects to use C407, which is compliance by energy cost. The way that the building performance factors are set up, almost every project will have an easier time focusing on building electrification and targeting Appendix SE. It is particularly fun for an energy modeler then to be able to talk about energy savings rather than just energy cost savings. And the reason for that is, if you've paid any utility bills in the last couple of years, they are extremely variable. And meanwhile, energy use is not. So we can be very consistent when we're talking about energy use and energy savings versus energy costs, which are definitely changing all the time. So it's a more, I guess, a resilient analysis to think about energy savings, and also aligns with some of our other goals for Denver. So it's not to say that a C407 pathway isn't the right pathway for a lot of projects. Like this one, for example, could have pursued the C407 pathway if they had been able to squeeze out an extra 2% savings, and then they would have, less solar requirement than going with the Appendix SE. If this, if we were working on this project, that's probably what I would encourage, because we could get our solar array cut down by half. That's certainly motivating. But the different options are there so that you have you do have both options available, and that you can evaluate both at the same time.
Excuse me. Okay. Well, plugging right along. For a multifamily building, do I need to do air leakage testing for all of the units?
Good question.
Oh,
And
you got
that's
that one, Linda?
yeah, let's see. Let's take the slides
Let's see.
back to, maybe that's 38. Yeah,
37.
37. So
There it
this is
is
one of the places where Denver is not using the air leakage testing procedures from 90.1, but is referring back to be consistent with the air leakage testing that's in C402.5. So the dwelling and sleeping units do need to be tested, and we're doing sampling permitted when it's 8 units or more, following the rules that are in that C402.5.2 requirements.
Okay, and here's another one. Why are we being asked to report the Energize Denver 2030 requirements when it's not a requirement for new buildings?
All right, let me give just a little bit of background on that, if someone isn't especially familiar with the Energize Denver and what that means. So Denver has adopted a building performance standard, and that's referred to as Energize Denver for our, and we're tracking the build utilities, putting them into the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and reporting an energy use intensity. So that's what an existing building is doing when they're 25,000 square feet or larger. And over time, that target energy use intensity moves towards a 2030 target. So here we've got the 2030 target for a couple different building types up. So the purpose of reporting this through the construction documents, it's a spot that lives in the checklist, is so that the project team and especially the owner also get a chance to kind of get familiar with what that EUI target is going to be in the future. And that can help to inform decisions on where to make investments. So it's not something that is it's not really a compliance, it's more for information and having the project team and the owner think ahead to how to comply with this future requirement as the building is operating.
Thank you for that, Linda. Yeah, and we already, I think we mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, but we will be sending out this recording of the presentation as well as a copy of the slide deck. So we see here we've got the information on Energized Denver ordinance hyperlinked. So folks, when we send this information out, folks can go and learn more. And we hope to get the presentation and the recording up on our website, the denvergov.org/energy code, probably in 1 to 2 weeks, hopefully. And we will also notify everyone who attended via email that those are posted. So you can email me, but I'm going to tell you what I just told you. We'll send it out via email as soon as we can. And with that, I am not seeing any open questions in the Q&A. Oh, we got one more. Okay. So folks, kind of last chance. We got our experts on the line. So if you have any other questions, let us know. Here's one we have. Let's see. Oh, I think that was one we're going to. I think that's one we're going to respond to directly. So if we, for questions we'll answer either live or follow up with folks offline if it's something that is a little bit more specific to their project or a little bit more detailed than we're going to get into in today's webinar. So we will be getting to every question, and I don't see any others open. So with that, I guess, Elizabeth, you did an incredible job presenting because we don't have too many questions on here. So thank you everyone for attending. We will be back. Actually, I think we're taking a little break. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our next commercial presentation.
Actually, for this one, we'll be back in a week. So
in a week. Thank
we
you,
keep
Linda.
moving right along. Yeah, with one that's specific to contractors and inspectors.
Oh, that's right. Residential has the gap. Okay, well, we come see us again next week. We got 2 more parts in the commercial training series, and we have another residential training next week. So thank you everyone who attended, and we appreciate your continued interest in this topic and continued attendance in this webinar series. So with that, I'm going to call it a day and end this webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.